not shopping before.
No, the fucking internet just keeps dropping out.
Hello and welcome to Game of Nodes, a weekly podcast on the Cosmos from independent validator streams. Independent validator streams? Independent validator teams. That was nearly professional for the first time in our history. We're here, as always, well, as mostly always, with a very frozen Null, with Schultzy and with Todd, who's going to be talking to us about the new release of Tender Duty 2, the hottest product on the street for the validator that wants to monitor their nodes. But first up, we got some follow-ups for next week. For next week, what is my sense of time has obviously got very screwy. From last week.
One thing I'd add to that, as a kid, one of the things I had the most difficulty with is telling the difference between like, I did this yesterday versus I did it tomorrow. And so I'd be talking about things I'm going to do, or I did, and I'd be saying, tomorrow I did X, Y, and Z. So I don't know why I did that, but just with you talking about going a little bit off, I totally relate.
Is there a specific thing where children are less aware of the passage of time or something? Or is it just that we're both bad at remembering which is the correct word?
There's probably something to do with that. I mean, children don't get object permanence until they're like, what, 4? So, or maybe I don't know. I don't know children. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, that was a bit of a weird divergence caused by me doing the verbal equivalent of a typo. So we've got one of the biggest follow-ups we've got from last week is a variety of stuff on the Validator League discussion, because I gather that's moved on a little bit, and they're now restructuring. Is that right? And I think we're possibly even going to have Ghost and possibly Tyborg coming on the show on a future episode, actually, to talk about how that stuff is evolving. Is that right, folks?
Yeah, I believe so. I think next week, but I'm not certain.
Yeah. And eagle-eye viewers will have spotted that there is no usurper here because he is, I think, stuck in a hotel lobby somewhere. We presume drinking whiskey on his own. So one of the other Null's frozen again. I think we have just lost him. Let's move on while Null is frozen to to talk about Tender Duty 2. So we've got Todd with us, most validators have the problem of like obviously monitoring their nodes, and I think it's pretty common that people are going to use something like Grafana or Zabbix, Prometheus as a sync into one of those two services. I'm guessing we're on here mostly using Zabbix. Is that right? Okay, yeah. For monitoring, and then the other part of observability is obviously notifications when things go wrong. That's where Todd comes in with the incredibly useful Tender Duty tool for monitoring Cosmos validator nodes. It's used very extensively by people on the show and around the show, and everyone's very appreciative for it. And there is a new version that is just out. So we thought we'd get Todd on the show to talk about what's new in Tender Duty 2. So
yeah, thanks, man. And I'll share my screen, but I'll try to narrate thoroughly since I know some people listen on audio only. So Tender Duty kind of it is one of those things where it's like I kept finding myself looking at MintScan or ping.pub to see if I was missing blocks. It's like, hey, how am I doing on blocks? And it was like, this is not okay. There's got to be something for this, right? So, yeah. So, let's see. How do I share my screen? Oh boy. All right. It requires sharing my whole screen, which is 47-inch monitor. So I don't know if that's going to work. Tell you what, I can jump back on from a different computer real quick. That makes this easier. And it looks like Noel's moving again. So I'll pick it up here in a minute. Is that all right, guys?
Yeah, no worries.
He really just didn't want to share his
me a question or
bookmarks.
something before? Is that before I was frozen?
What did you say, Nell? Sorry. Well, it's plenty of technical difficulties, this issue. So yeah, before the show started, we were talking about Horcrux as well, because obviously it's been a very common topic on the show, is remote signers and using that kind of infrastructure to secure your nodes, so that you don't have to have key matter on a given box. And Schultzy, you've finally made the jump, I think maybe the first out of all of the Game of Nodes crew to make the jump to full Horcrux, right?
Yeah, so I guess for context, when you run a validator, there's kind of like 3 stages of key signing. There's what most people do, which is you leave the key, which is like the way your validator is assigned on the validator machine itself, and then the validator kind of signs for itself. And then the second stage is you have a remote signer. So there's a software called Tenderlovin key management system, which that says then you have like your node running, and then you have a second node running that points to the first one that says, hey, I'm going to sign the blocks for them. And what that does is it kind of gives a layer of indirection in terms of security. You can keep the remote signer really locked down, and then the node less locked down, and you're still secure. Another benefit with that is if your node goes down, you can just point it to another one really easily. And then the third solution is you can have multiple signers pointing to multiple nodes to make sure that you're always signing in some capacity. So with Horcrux, it's that third level where I can have basically 2 nodes go down and still be signing perfectly fine. Similarly, I can have multiple of the signers go down and still be signing. So basically, it's a method for ensuring that your blocks are just always signed no matter what, short of something utterly catastrophic.
Right.
Hey guys.
Hey Todd. Back on different machine.
Yeah.
So we were just talking about Schultzy's migration to Horcrux, and he's just explained basically what the benefit of essentially a cluster of threshold signers is over a single box running something like TMKMS. So the interesting thing as well is, like, there's all of it's obviously there's a threshold signer, and that's all lots of fun with Raft and whatnot, but also just the even to actually create the key matter, you basically need additional tools to shard the key in a particular way and stuff like that as well, don't you? And so, like, there's quite a lot of steps involved in actually making that a viable production ready thing you can do, right?
Yeah.
But I think the thing that we were also talking about earlier was that there was some quite unexpected behavior in terms of what you saw when you actually sort of ran it in production, right?
Yeah, so for testnet, it was absurdly stable. Horcrux itself is typically pretty CPU bound. Whenever I run on testnets, because I set up on my testnets first, it ran perfectly stable. I ran it for almost a week with just the testnets, and everything worked fine. But then when I brought it onto mainnet, I was using AWS instances, and at around 4 a.m. every morning, one of the Horcrux signers would just decide it was time for it to completely peg out on its resource usage, which would cause all sorts of missed blocks. And it was even inconsistent across which day, because this happened the last 4 days in a row. Some days it'd be the first signer, sometimes it'd be second signer, sometimes it'd be the third signer. And it's still ongoing as to what the issue was, but hopefully it is more or less resolved, as I've switched from using AWS instances, which can be spun up kind of on the fly, versus using bare metal machines for the signers as well, which is also cheaper because AWS is absurdly expensive.
So where do you have your bare metal machines at for Horcrux?
I now have one on Vultr, one on OVH Cloud, and one on Hetzner. So one in Helsinki, one in Virginia, and one in, I want to say Oregon.
So if you do you have like a whole bare metal machine just for a Horcrux signer?
No, I've already got instances for those either way. So Vultr and OVH Cloud hold, they have bare metal machines that can work with secret. And so I'm basically reusing those to also be used as a signer.
So yeah, and I think that's the original intent of Horcrux, is to have it alongside nodes on actual, instead of having them on dedicated instances anyway. So
Is it?
Yeah. Well, when you look at when Jack used to originally talk about it, he used to say that, you know, you'd deploy it next to a node, because, you know, we use it in a bit of a degen way, in that the original intent is that you would have a swarm of signers for one network, not you know, sharing it across a couple of networks, like running multiple signers on one node. So the original architecture and intent was to launch it out next to a node running on a instance somewhere, and then it, like, that signer would just talk to that node and the other signers, and then the other signers would talk to their node and the other signers. So it wouldn't be like, so you'd have the lowest latency to the node and the network, but then they could talk to each other.
Right.
Like,
so it's like having 3 sentries, each of which has a signer. None of the signers, none of them have the key matter, so it doesn't matter that you've got 3 extra things out in the world, right?
Yeah. So the signers only have a portion of the key matter on there. It's impossible to put it back together unless you've got like them all.
Yeah.
For
some reason, my mental model was totally broken. I thought the whole point was like, it was more like Kafka and Zookeeper. So like you deploy 3 signers to a cluster, and then they point at a cluster of sentries, where if one of those sentries goes down, you round robin to the next one, or you just round robin them via proxy anyway. But the cluster of signers is going, lads, let's roll.
So there's many ways to skin a cat with Horcrux, and you know, it just depends on how much of a degenerate you are. I'm the ultimate.
And a lot of people do actually keep their signer on the same machine still. That's super common. I was actually talking to someone about it today, about a script that they wrote basically for setting up their machines doing that.
Yeah, that's but I haven't deployed Horcrux on any main nets yet, but that's how I've got my Ansible set up, is one signer, one node, same box. So
I saw, so Schultzy, I'm not sure if I tagged you yesterday in the chat, but there's Dan BND is going to be a Kujira validator, and he had this hectic Terraform scripting to like launch everything in one click. It was crazy, but I think it was alongside the nodes as well.
I haven't seen that, but it sounds absolutely fascinating. Terraform is one of those things that where I see it and I'm like, oh, someone knows what they're doing. And then you look at it and you're like, I don't know what's going on. They might know what they're doing. They might not. I don't know.
I was literally like, say this is the timeline, right? So I was talking to him about some stuff, and then he asked me about TMKMS, right? Because I had the that, you know, that script up there that makes it pretty easy. And I said, well, you know, if you want to know about it, have a look at that, read through it. I talked to him a couple of times that day, right? And then he had TMKMS up on the testnet, and he was pretty happy with it. And then, like, I said, if you want a better solution, maybe have a look at Horcrux, and gave him the link to Horcrux. Like 2 days later, he's like, oh man, I've spent the whole day scripting. You'll be pretty impressed with like my setup. And he sent me the link to his repo on GitHub. I was like, holy fuck, man. He's written like 300 lines just for the config file. And then there's like four other files that like make this thing work. I was like, holy shit, dude. You did this today? And he's like, yeah, I started this morning.
Yeah, Terraform's pretty verbose though.
To be fair, like I did a spaces with him the other day, and he is like a DevOps genius. So he's like new to validating, but like a DevOps, he's pretty good.
Yeah,
I wish he could join my team.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure he is. There's definitely a thing though with ops stuff that a lot of especially the automation scripting tools are. There's a combination of things, isn't there? Well, for the purposes of like of this conversation, they tend to be quite verbose because obviously they're configuration management, all that kind of stuff. But the more pertinent thing maybe for this is that there are really heavy diminishing returns on something that you don't need to DR very often. And there've definitely been a couple of times in my career where I've spent like a month getting a completely like rock solid set of Terraform scripts or Ansible scripts or whatever for a thing, only to then find that, oh no, we need to change this major thing about the way we deploy the software. And it's like, right, that's basically all in the bin.
Scrap that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like you want to deploy like two database instances behind Nginx, showing my age a little bit there. Perhaps I don't know if people are still using it as a reverse proxy all the time, but and you like script all of that, blah 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 blah, happy days, and then a month later it's like, actually we're spending a lot of time on database ops. Should we just put it on our Amazon RDS? And you're like, yeah, I mean, we can do that. But I have to rewrite all of our database deployment scripts. And it's like, yeah, or we can just do it via the Amazon console this one time. And then as anybody who's actually deployed any of the, the highly managed AWS RDS instances knows, you deploy it via the console and then you write a script in case it goes down, and it never fucking goes down ever. And then so you're just like, and then somebody asks you at a conference, oh yeah, how do you manage your thingy, and you're like, yeah, I mean, we've got like 1,200 lines of Terraform, but to be honest, lads, we just deployed it via the console. So I would love to pretend that we have some really shiny stuff going on, but nah, it's all just paranoia, really.
So my only comment to him was that he's like, here it is. Do you have any comments? And I'm like, it's on AWS. You're going to be broke real quick.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I only went with AWS because I got the $1,000 startup credit. So I was like, I can just blow through these and nothing matters. But
apparently
I was using, well, yeah, apparently what I was using would be, I think, $200 a month per signer. And I was like, I need to optimize that away anyway. Even if it's free, I actually can't stomach it.
Yeah, I was going to say $1,000 won't get you far.
No. For us, I think we're going to spray it around DigitalOcean in multiple locations on DigitalOcean. See how that goes. But I'm doing like I'm doing stepping stones. So I was on TMKMS. Now I'm like single signer Horcrux pointed at multiple nodes. And the next step will be like, once I'm comfortable with that, the next step will be working out how I'm going to reliably do multiple signers. But yeah, it should be pretty interesting. But I need to work out my Ansible, man. I need to watch the rest of them videos.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's also like, I think one of the things that I'm quite interested in trying to do is like the whole cache thing, which obviously I've been experimenting quite a bit with recently, but you can't, well, I mean, you can, but it's going to be hugely complex to deploy Horcrux signers in that containerized environment in like mini pods with the Akash with the validators that you deploy into a cache. Like by the time you've done that, you may as well actually just buy a couple of really big bare metal boxes and actually do it yourself, because I bet dollars to donuts it will be cheaper than running it on a cache.
Man. After your experiments on a cache, I kind of like, it turned me off a little bit.
Yeah, I think
I'll say that deploying my website on there, now granted this is because it requires 0 resources, was ridiculously smooth. And when one provider went down, I went to the other one, it took me all of like a minute to redeploy.
But you can deploy it with like so unrelated to websites, but if you have a look at the Cosmos Omnibus repo, there's an example in there about how to deploy 2 nodes with a load balancer to 2 different providers. So there's that as well.
Interesting. I was told that wasn't something that could be done. You'd have to do it manually. So I'll have to look around in that.
Maybe it was a long time ago. Maybe I've got my wires crossed now, but it'd be interesting to have a look anyway.
Can't you only deploy? Yeah, I don't know, man, because the provider is hosting the deployment, which is a thin wrapper around Kubernetes. So I'm not sure how it could.
Or maybe it's on the same provider. Might be my fuck up there. I'm not sure.
Yeah, same provider. It would be pretty easy to just put Nginx in front of two RPCs for sure, or whatever it is. I mean, actually, running RPCs. I get why. So the difficulty, I think, is supply side. I think we were talking about this privately. Like, is that the tech kind of works like surprisingly well. The marketplace works and all that kind of thing, but the supply side of it is a bit more complicated. And like Schultzy says, sometimes providers kind of go away. So I think you would want to be in the position where you had like redundancy. The cool thing is that like you can, like, because of Omnibus, like Tom's great work again, you can just like bootstrap a node from nothing quite quickly. And that is really impressive when you do that. And so that was really what's pushed me down into TMKMS finally, like adopting that properly and all that kind of stuff, is because like, oh, look, you can literally just spin up RPCs, and those could be validator nodes that are quite throwaway longer term. And just as long as you know where to point them, you know, you're just reloading config somewhere, and that, you know, you can obviously drive that a variety of ways. You can script it with Ansible, you can do whatever on your TMKMS node, whatever. But there is that kind of lingering feeling that the provider might go away. And so that's the missing piece for me a little bit, is I haven't really worked out how to monitor it effectively, and I haven't really worked out the pricing, because again, I think we were talking about it, like getting a reliable deployment, you're sort of $60-$70 ballpark, I found, and that will buy you quite a bit of bare metal. That will buy you quite a bit of DigitalOcean. It'll even buy you quite a bit of AWS. But that potentially is a bit of a segue into TenderDuty. Now Null is unfrozen, because one of the things I was thinking about was obviously, well, one of the ways you can monitor, you can at least have alerts when things go down, is TenderDuty. And since that runs, well, typically it's run containerized anyway, co-locating that with a node with its RPC port open only to other containers within the deployment is actually very viable. So that's pretty cool. So I have to confess, I'm probably the only one not using TenderDuty on the entire Game of Nodes crew.
You're not using it at all? What are you using?
How do you monitor your shit?
Yeah,
I use Monet and Cron, and
I use Monet too, man. It's like Monet is like the core of my monitoring.
Oh yeah,
yeah. I mean, I use Monet for. I've got crazy Ansible scripts that build all these massive Monet configs that check everything, man. Wear leveling on my disks.
Shit. You know, you can do wear level monitoring on Zabbix now too. Plug.
Oh, nice. I mean,
it's a module.
You don't
have a crazy Ansible script. You just go like install that friggin' smart monitoring CLI, and it just picks it up, and it's like, oh, now I can do this.
Right, but so my reasoning here is this, right? Is that there are lots and lots of things that can go wrong. I know that if the shell fails, that box is toast, right? I know if Monet fails, the box is toast. Like those are things that are not going to fail. cron is not going to fail.
Yeah,
so
but you don't necessarily like have to have a toast box to stop signing though. You can have a toast signer.
well, sure, but like that's the point of the bash script, which is checking various things about the box on a short interval, and then is going, okay, if any of this is wrong, then I'm going to immediately hit a PagerDuty endpoint essentially. So it's not different, significantly different to Tenderduty. It's just a homebrew config involving Monet and a web request via curl.
So actually, what Tenderduty does is different, and that's why I wrote it. At first, I was like, there's nothing doing what it does, and it needed to happen. So it subscribes to the blocks on a WebSocket, and it checks for your signature, and that's where that's what the main purpose of it was to say, hey, if I miss 3 blocks, I need to get up and fix something. I don't care about node health. I don't care about anything else. Well, now I do, but it was built for one purpose and only one thing. And I think the first version that people started using was like 140 lines of code total. So it was like this tiny little single purpose, very Unix-like type tool that did one thing. So, and then it's grown quite a bit. And now with V2, it does a lot of stuff. So, and this is stuff people have been asking for and stuff I've been wanting to do as well, So now it's kind of a full Cosmos monitoring tool that goes beyond just, hey, did I miss some blocks kind of thing. So, yeah.
I know that like all of us thought it was awesome and all of us use it, but all of us are always like, hey man, have you thought about adding this thing? And you're like, oh yeah, I'll put it on the list. And I'm like, hey man, have you thought about like making it like easier to look at? Oh, I'll put that on the list. Hey man, like, can you monitor this other thing too? Oh, okay.
Yeah. So now, it's got a dashboard, a Prometheus exporter, which is still in the works, but like, hey, if your node goes down, how long has it been down kind of thing? Or, how many times did I miss a block where I actually sent in a pre-commit and the proposer didn't include it? And that's a big question for me a lot of times if I'm not performing well on a chain. Is like, is this actually my fault? Or is this, somebody else out there set to sign blocks at 3 seconds, that's making me drop. So,
and just to explain that for people who are listening, because this is a thing we've seen on several networks, right? The 3 second signing. What's the reason that that's causing you to miss blocks?
Because the proposer is setting a limited time before that they will propose a block at 67%. So normally if you wait, I think it's 5 seconds after your first pre-commit or something like that, until you actually propose the block. And if you crank those numbers down, you can reduce block time on a chain, but you're also going to have a lot of validators missing blocks. I think this might actually be, I'm suspect that this is causing a problem on Secret Network right now, because their average block time is like 5.2 seconds, which is a hair faster than I'd expect. So somebody out there speeding up the block time.
So someone with a lot of like voting weight to hit a lot of blocks.
I haven't dug into it, but at some point I will, and probably reach out to them individually and say, hey, you might want to
do it on Twitter.
But yeah, I mean, we've seen that on so.
Todd, I think I lost your audio. Did you guys lose the audio?
Is that just me or?
Okay.
Battery went flat? Nah, we can't hear you, man. So, I mean, I love Tenderduty. It's like so light. So one thing I want to know is like when Todd gets back on here is, so there's a new configuration Well, he's completely rewritten it, right? So now it's like, I think it's even a different language now, or maybe it's still Go, but he's added in extra features. And what I'm going to want to know is like, can you turn off the Prometheus exporter, etc., to try and keep it as light as possible? So I use Zabbix. I'll probably like query it in different ways with Zabbix through the different ways you can actually send commands through Zabbix to your server. So, things like the Prometheus exporter, I won't want. But also, like, I'm wondering if it's multiple network configuration in the one file, because you used to have to launch multiple instances and configure all your networks separately. And up until recently, I thought that meant that you had to bring them all down when you wanted to change the configuration and then bring them all back up. But apparently with Docker Daemon, I just figured this out the other day, you can actually just update your configuration file and then re-up them into daemons, and it'll just update them. And you can use a flag that'll drop all the dead containers and delete them. So
Damon Hill,
no,
race
dead,
car driver.
Dead containers.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yeah, man, you're back now.
All right,
yeah.
man. I've just had so much technical trouble today.
Sorry, I just took the liberty to ramble some shit while you weren't here.
Oh, no, totally. And actually, all this
Pronounced demon really weird too.
Incredibly relevant because oh boy.
Apparently, I can't say demon or Damon.
I've always called it Damon.
Well, Damon is a name. It's a name, like it's just an old English name, and demon is a like a malicious spirit.
So
Haunts
you guys you're gonna laugh because Chrome didn't have access to record my screen, and it wants me to restart.
Oh, we'll see you in 5 minutes.
Yeah,
That's what I'm gonna do, man. I'm just gonna explain what's going on with it, and if you're interested in checking it out, I've got a
Do you have a working page somewhere? Because Null can probably throw it up on the screen.
Actually, you know what? I've got a public
Share
my notes.
Share the link in the private chat, and then Null can throw it up.
Yeah. So, anyways, you were saying that one of the pain points was one chain per config, right? And so now that's you can do multiple chains on one running instance. The dashboard is very much inspired by oh boy, battles.
It's too late. It doesn't matter what she said. It's like you don't matter.
Welcome to summer. Anyways, the display on there is very much inspired by what's going on ping.pub, except it is quite wide, and you can actually scroll over. I want to say I keep the last 512 blocks, so you can see kind of where you missed, where you signed, the different colors. When you propose isn't a big deal, but I thought it was kind of cool to be able to see where and when I proposed, to see how often it was happening. My dashboard is incredibly boring because there's nothing fun happening here. A lot of my testing I've been doing with other validators. They've been very helpful. They don't know it, but
that's a low-key flex if ever I've heard one.
What's that?
That's a low-key flex if ever I've heard one. Oh, my network's boring because I missed so few blocks.
Well, I did miss a block on Terra Classic there, it looks like. So yeah, that's great. But yeah, so the dashboard is something that I wanted just kind of because I never really had that information. So when something fails, you get a nice little orange alert message, and you can click on it and see the details. And this is like set up for public use. So it like normally if it would have a log stream below showing like, hey, this RPC node is not responding, or something like that, right? So, and yeah, that, I mean, the dashboard it's a dashboard. There's not much to it. Just then, yeah, like I mentioned, there's Prometheus endpoint. If my screen share were working, I'd show you the beginnings of a Grafana dashboard, but can't. And then each thing is configurable now, so you can alert to Discord, Telegram, or PagerDuty, and it's configurable per chain. So you can have different alert destinations per each chain. So, and like I said, this is done. This is essentially done. I'm working on docs, and then I'm going to tag it as a beta probably within an hour or so of ending this podcast. So
wait, you can do. I didn't realize that it had the notification stuff, because I was looking at what's it called, Half-Life, which I know some of the other Game of Nodes folks use for Discord notifications, but I hadn't realized, because I think, like I said about the Akash stuff, has started to motivate me to move to even on our servers, probably Dockerizing and actually deploying everything using our same mount strategy, but starting to use sort of Dockerized containers. And that's Tendermint has been on my list for a while to work out like what the gap is between what we're doing and how good it could be. And I think that might be the killer feature for us there. Yeah. So how does that work? Is it just like sending? Is it just possible to basically configure and send push notifications then to additional sources?
Yeah. I mean, if you want to alert to Discord, you just set up a webhook on a channel, and it can post in. And then like Telegram is kind of a pain to find the group ID for the chat, but you can get a API key and then invite the bot into a chat room, and it can send stuff. PagerDuty, obviously, API key. The one benefit to using PagerDuty is you can run multiple instances, and it'll deduplicate alerts based on a key that I set when I signal alarm. So you can have redundant tender duties. So redundancy in your redundancy.
So wait, you could have like a tender duty on the node, and you have like a tender duty somewhere else pointing at an RPC, and then it would deduplicate them.
Yeah, because it uses the same key, right? So like
so it updates the same message, right? So
oh my god, did my mic cut out again?
Yeah, just for a second it said you were muted.
Crazy. Wow, this new MacBook isn't entirely stable. Yeah, man. So it dedupes based on a key that you set, and depending on the type of alert it's sending, I set different keys. But like, I think I use the Valcons address, the consensus public key address as the key for like missed block alerts, and so PagerDuty won't resend an alert with the same key, but you can resolve an alert automatically with the same key. So yeah, so it's nothing special I'm doing, just something they do for us already. But yeah, see what else is new about it.
How long did it take you to develop the first tender duty?
About 4 hours.
What a machine.
Well, I mean, it's not hard. You just subscribe to a WebSocket and look for a key in the resulting JSON. So that was super easy. It's when you start adding edge cases and configurability, and you break something, and then you're like, oh well, I got to fix that. And So,
Okay.
yeah.
So with those 4 hours, you saved probably thousands of man hours. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, but yeah, since then I've put weeks of work into it, but especially now I'm about 7-8 days into this, this effort. So that's a lot of work. That's a significant amount of time.
As an aside, as somebody who comes from like primarily a high level programming background, like I'm in the grander scheme of things relatively new to Rust, like and I guess I've written a bit of Go here and there in the past, but like this is one of those things I think that people maybe from, like I say, kind of like me, who have maybe from more of a high level programming background, to those of you that aren't programmers, it means closer, high level, generally higher level of abstraction, like further where assembly is the lowest level of not abstraction at all, really, up to literally like whatever you see in your web browser, I guess is the way of explaining it. But so the cool thing about the first version, which I think I remember seeing at the time, because this is I think why I end up just being like, I don't need to listen for the WebSocket, so I'm just going to like knock together a bash script in 5 minutes. But I think I remember seeing that first version, and it is like essentially, yeah, the stuff you can't do in a bash script because it's a WebSocket subscription. Go's got an API for that. It's like a few calls and then a bit of JSON parsing, and then boom. But the really cool thing is, for somebody from like a high level programming background, you look at it and you go like, this is essentially a small script, a Go file that is essentially being treated like a scripting language, and it's going to emit a binary, which then you can pretty much run everywhere. And in addition, you also supplied a Docker file with it, so you literally can run it everywhere with Docker. But it's one of those things that, like, I guess I hadn't really thought about until I saw, I think it was your script for TenderDuty, and something I went back to a little while ago because somebody from Terra was asking how to listen for a particular type of emitted COSM-WASM event. And I remember that Jans Alex, who has done quite a bit of core work on Juno, had written like a tiny, again, like a 30-line Go file that you could obviously then compile to a binary and be like, here you are, listen for whatever you want to listen for.
Yeah, actually, writing
clients
for Tenderman is crazy easy because you just call into their RPC library, and so it's like, hey, I want to get this. It's like 4 lines of code, so the API is well defined there. The annoying part, though, is where you end up with different, like, some stuff's protobuf, some stuff is JSON. If it's JSON, everything's a string. So now you've got, if you're in a strongly typed language, that's a problem. Now you've got to deal with reflection and casting and all that fun stuff. So, RPC isn't great. gRPC client is awesome. I mean, you can do everything, but that requires a little bit more knowledge to program against. So,
again, I'll expose my ignorance to this. What's the difference between RPC and gRPC in this case?
RPC is a web protocol, returns JSON. gRPC, it's a Web 2 protocol. I mean, HTTP 2 protocol, but it all relies on protobuf, which is a binary. It's the binary format at the core of ABCI, the blockchain interface databases.
I've encountered, obviously protobuf is quite deeply embedded in Cosmos, and like former life doing data infrastructure, protobuf is one of the things. It's one of those things like Avro, I guess, like Avro you see as well, but like protobuf is pretty common as a serialization mechanism.
Yeah, I think one of the big differences is that Avro, generally you can embed the definitions with the message. In protobuf, you don't do that.
So I think the motivation for, sorry. No.
Can one of you guys explain what protobuf is so that people who are listening don't know exactly what you're talking about?
I don't know.
So like JSON is like structured data, right? It comes
yeah.
So what is protobuf?
Protobuf's an efficient data messaging protocol. You define what type everything is, and then it builds. I don't know. I don't know if you guys are familiar with like ABIs from Ethereum or EOSIO world, where you've got an ABI and everything's binary and you pack it in. That's basically what protobuf does. It's a way of creating APIs, but it takes it another step where you've got all these binary definitions and ways of compressing stuff, and then it adds the ability to build APIs around it automatically. So when you have a type, you can say, hey, this is how you set it. This is how you get it with just a regular function. And then it'll build out the gRPC APIs, and then even on Tendermint, the REST APIs. So,
is that type like basically it makes a smaller message, like less data transfer and stuff like that as well, quicker? It's just more more overhead on both sides.
Yeah, for like a string, you get a null byte and then the length of the string, and then if field is mandatory, you just get a null byte between each one. So it's super efficient that way.
Yeah.
While we're talking about these interfaces, what's an LCD now?
I call it REST.
Yeah, in the documentation, it's called REST. But I have to admit, I have no fucking clue what LCD means in this context.
Light client daemon. It's from before when the client daemon was split out from the Tendermint daemon, right? So it would talk to Tendermint over, I believe, a gRPC socket, and then it was like, well, why do we have this kind of thing? It's like,
so it's just basically another layer to make it easier for people to talk to it.
Yeah,
who understand REST and not gRPC.
Well, it exposes everything in gRPC, almost everything.
But you could alternatively just talk to gRPC instead,
if you know how.
Yes, that's the big question.
It is something that takes a little bit of time to get your head around, I think, but it's so core if you're going to do any kind of dev on Cosmos. I believe, having a good understanding of how it uses protobuf is pretty key.
Yeah, there's this kind of insane thing that happens if you actually define anything new in protobuf and then just kind of like obviously run it. And it just generates all this like loads of stuff, and you're like, whoa. So yeah, I'm still not 100%. Again, not 100% used to how that works in Cosmos, but it does make you look like you were typing very, very quickly when you do get to do that. So that's not. I know it's not even my joke. It's something Jabby said because he's a funnier man than I am. He was like, "Look how fast I'm typing," and he was just like generating all this protobuf stuff. But I guess that it'd be quite interesting. I've never really thought about how it must work under the hood for the arbitrary types I know a little bit of how it works for the arbitrary types that you generate from smart contracts, but obviously they're then exposed via a underlying protobuf message in WASM-D, which is then available to the client, but you essentially do an extra layer of misdirection, don't you, at the smart contract level, because you're doing that execute contract and then passing along the stuff. And I think this was actually a sticking point with talking about auth-z for smart contracts, because technically, if I remember correctly, every smart contract that I've ever seen that runs in Cosmos on CosmWasm expects a top level JSON object as its message, because then you can unpack the types in Rust. We're using the SERDI library. In this case, where for those listening, SERDI means serialization, deserialization. So think code, something happening through code into JSON and then back out of JSON, something like that. SERDI. but apparently the underlying code makes no assumptions about the shape. So even though in practice it would be pretty hard to work with anything that didn't say, oh, by the way, I'm a message of this type arriving at the smart contract, apparently that's not actually an assumption that holds at WASM-D level, and it was causing some
you almost have to like
trouble.
wrap the original message in JSON inside the message. So ouch.
It's all fun and games.
So anyways, a huge thank you to the Osmosis Grants people. They gave me a grant to do this rewrite, and it's something I wanted to do for a while, and it helps a lot of people. So I hope people find it useful, and I don't have anything else to say about it. So
how was the grant process? Like, did you have to go through like interview panels, or did you write up,
Yeah, I did an
1,000 words?
interview, video call the interview, and put together a proposal that I submitted. I went through a couple of rounds of review. I think it's easier because I said, hey, I don't want anything up front. If I don't deliver, you don't pay me, and if you're not happy, then okay, it was worth a chance. So I don't know what the final review process looks like. I'm not going to call them up until I'm done, but I'm close. So,
I mean, yeah, I think that of all the things that we've seen recently that are kind of up for grants and things, tender duty is one of the most actually pragmatically useful things. So I'm sure it's not going to be a problem when it comes to it. I've just noticed we've had a question in the chat from Adam Burke. Says, I'll put it up on the screen, but I'll read it out for those listening on podcast players. Super Baby technical question. If I wanted to get information about specific chain, validator, ranking, block time, any kind of data available on a block explorer, how would I do that? The short version is via RPC, and the long version, Todd?
Yeah, I mean, there's an API for that.
Could be a new catchphrase.
Yeah.
There's an API for that.
There's also the RPC for that.
I guess it really depends on what you're trying to get, but yeah, command line makes it pretty easy. I cheat a lot. I will use the command line tool with a sniffer and catch what request it's actually sending, because that's sometimes so much faster than trying to read the code and figure out what the queries are. And so that's usually my go-to trick.
I tend to use Cosm.js and do the same thing, just grep through the code for Cosm.js on GitHub to find a function signature that looks like the thing that I'm trying to accomplish, and then just fire it off from the console in the browser and just see what it looks like in the network inspector. And obviously part of it is encoded always. But you kind of tend to get an idea. You're like, all right, I kind of see it's doing this thing. Okay, cool.
Yeah, and then the types can get weird depending on if you're using REST or RPC. But I have found a trick. With most endpoints, you can do a raw ABCI query over RPC, and that'll give you protobuf back. And then you can just use the native types from whatever X modules you're working against directly out of the RPC. And it's like 3 steps instead of trying to figure out how to handle all this JSON and reflection and stuff. So that's a pretty cool trick too.
So for the dashboard stuff, are you using, presumably it's all JavaScript, right? Or TypeScript, maybe?
It's almost all Go. The dashboard is a little bit of JavaScript. The little grid is all written in Canvas. So that's kind of nasty, but it's fast and it's light, and
so Canvas is for people who don't know, Canvas is like a library, right?
Canvas is a part of the HTML5 spec. You're just drawing with coordinates. So say, make a rectangle from X, Y to, and then draw a line from here, set my color.
So is that dynamic as well? Or like, so when you say that, is that setting out the grid in the page like that, or is that using the individual elements like that? Because, for setting out your page, I thought you would have used something like CSS grids or something like that.
Yeah, a lot of people have built stuff using like tables and grids and stuff. It repaints the whole image every time it refreshes. So it's big loop over a array of, or a map of arrays. So basically.
So would that be considered light or heavy in terms of resource?
It's super light. It sips resources. It's a lot faster than including, a giant graphing library. I have a few that I really like. I just didn't find any that would do this kind of grid thing. So this was an experiment that worked.
So theoretically, like you could create a similar dashboard to like what Crow's Nest has and Bro. That's a lot lighter and quicker to load using sort of the process that you've already used for TenderDuty 2 and building that web interface, right? But you just have to use some graphing libraries and stuff to make it a little bit more,
I'm not sure what you want to see. Are you talking about like a mist block thing for all the validators, or?
I'll bring it up. Keep talking. I'm slow.
Yeah, the stuff I did with Canvas is super simple. It's just a series of sequential rectangles.
Yeah, so I think we're getting into the weeds a tiny bit. So yeah, because you're looking at like a complex like Grafana UI. So behind the scenes, like a lot of this is probably being drawn with a graphing library. The reason it's slow with Grafana is depending on what you're feeding it from, is probably the source interval from Prometheus. So it's a combination of block time X, whatever the refresh rate is, plus any throttling depending on what tier you're on for Grafana. Like if you had the same UI tooling that Grafana is using, I don't know, D3 or something probably, and you had a WebSocket feeding it, like live data coming in at the speed of the data, it would just be real time. So it's not really a light client, heavy client, because almost every client now that has any client that has any kind of animation, right, and it's JavaScript, is not light, but by definition. But what Todd's done is use the lowest level version of that tool, which is Canvas. So at some point, almost all this stuff eventually is Canvas or an abstraction upon HTML5 Canvas, probably. So by going all the way down to that, you can write something that is painful to write but performant, rather than having to sort of import a bunch of graphing libraries to do one thing if you just want to do one thing. But if you want to do that one thing and you don't want to rewrite all that stuff from scratch, then that's probably when you bring in a graphing library, right?
Yeah, and I just didn't find any cool graphs that did what I wanted. So, I mean, I'm
exactly
not above bringing in e-charts, which I love, but it's huge, right?
Right.
So, yeah. So I wasn't trying to be efficient. It just side effect.
Just came out that way. Cool. Well, I've noticed we're honing up towards an hour now. I mean, obviously we lost about 5-10 minutes due to technical issues at the top of the show. So, but should we move on to? We got a couple of Ask Gamer Nodes questions. So should we do those?
Just before we do, I just want to ask Todd one more thing, and it'll be real quick, mate. How do you turn on and off the log, which I know I've seen you with a screenshot of the log, but looking at the one that I've got up, I can't seem
Everything
to see.
is done through a config file, just a YAML file, and it's got a variable for it, hide log or something like that. Yes or no. It's pretty well documented. I mean, I put comments on everything. So
yeah, I saw the log flash up when the page was loading and then disappear. I'm sort of like, oh, it must be like a shortcut or something to turn it on.
yeah, it's making a REST call to see if it should hide that or not, because it won't get logs streamed over the WebSocket if it's disabled. So
cool. So yeah, I guess move on the fray to ask Game of Nodes. Have we had any decent questions this week, or any questions at all?
We've had a couple, but one of the ones we have hanging from the other week is ICS, right? Because I stirred up quite a bit about ICS because I know we've been talking about it quite a bit on the show, and there was a lot said about it when we went and asked, and then I wasn't here that episode afterwards, so we didn't actually talk about it. But the other thing, there was actually an interesting discussion from Wispernode, which we got tagged in. So I think that there is an implication there that we were supposed to discuss it, which was about DApp chains and whether or not they are a good thing in Cosmos, which is, I think, is quite an interesting question. So it's essentially like the premise here is, do you need a single application chain to run a single app, right? Or can you just I've been under a rock and I don't validate Cosmos. So thank you, Putmos. So the comment, for those of you listening to podcast players, almost 1 hour in, no mention of Prop 72. The willpower is admirable. From
I don't even really also know what Prop 72 is. I read something yesterday, but I just discarded
it. So I think the context for why we were tagged in this is Prop 72, and I think, as usual, Schultzy is probably going to have to explain to us using small words what Prop 72 is all about. But so the thing that we were specifically tagged in, before I tag in Schultzy to tell us all what the hell is actually going on, was essentially whether or not DApp chains, i.e. chains that run only one application, are actually a good idea. And the quote of the tweet that we were specifically tagged in was, several convos in a couple of days. My opinion right now is that DApp chains and Cosmos dilate human, technical, and capital in the Cosmos ecosystem, and competition amongst L1s is ripping it apart and will continue to do so because there is not enough of any of the three to go around yet. That, I think, is a really interesting take. And so I'm like, game on, let's talk about it. But Schultzy, this is Prop 72, is it?
Yeah, to be honest, I haven't really reviewed this too much either. I've seen that there's a lot of drama around it right now, but I myself haven't yet engaged with it. So,
excellent.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's your answer, Potmos. The reason we didn't engage with Prop 72 until an hour in is because we don't really know what Prop 72 is.
No one knows. Who gives a fuck?
I mean, I guess I can TLDR the drama from what I understand.
Beautiful.
I just don't know the specifics of this proposal. So the drama, I believe, really stems around Gravity Bridge, if you boil it down all the way. Because Gravity Bridge originally was a proposal in Cosmos to implement it. And then rather than doing something to provide value back to Atom, they created their own chain, right? And not only did they create their own chain, they also, I don't know the specifics, but I think they airdropped to ion holders and stuff that was just considered very controversial. And I think that this is considered Gravity Bridge V2. So basically giving away a huge portion of the community pool to what will effectively become something that doesn't necessarily bring value back to Atom. That's my understanding of where the drum's at right now.
Right. Is there some there was some VC / Lido / there was some other thing that people were upset about?
Ooh, I know there's two aspects to so my understanding is this prop should have been broken up into two props. There should have been like, I want to say a liquid staking side of it and maybe a DeFi side. And instead of breaking them up into two separate ones, they've combined them together. And my understanding is that the DeFi side is considered like acceptable, and the liquid staking is considered kind of like creating more monoliths. Because Lido has, of course, basically taken over all of Ethereum staking. There's something like 60% of all Ethereum staking goes through Lido at this point. And the take from what my understanding, again, this is from very cursory reading, is that effectively you'd be funding another monolith to exist. Whenever one of the issues, of course, being that there's already two competitors here, right? You have Quicksilver, which is already going to be doing liquid staking. You have Persistence, and then you also have Celestia, which is also be providing interchain security already. And so there's all these competitors already that exist. So why spend, I want to say it's like $1.1 million to do something that's already coming to be? So it's quite literally bringing Lido into it. Interesting. So a comment said that the proposal is promoting Lido to build on ICS secured Cosmos chain. Interesting. Okay.
Right. Okay. That is interesting. So I don't really know why that's hyper controversial other than the gravity bridge, I guess, precedent. Adam Burks made an interesting comment in the comments saying DApp on its own chain is no longer a DApp anyway, but an app chain. IMO. Yeah, that's fair. And that, I mean, I guess that's the thing, isn't it? I guess the question is whether the thing that is being objected to here, because there's two separate things, aren't there? Because there's the idea that you don't have app chains is only possible if you build on, say, Cosmwasm substrate or something like that, so you can have like lots of apps on one chain. Otherwise, if you want to write it in Go, then you should probably just write it in the SDK, right? So I think there's quite a few things going on here, right? I mean, if you were building a project tomorrow, right, I think that everybody in this chat would go about it differently, right? Because we all come from different language backgrounds. Like Todd, you would go native, right? Presumably.
Yeah. Who knows what's going to happen though with Cosmwasm and Go? I mean,
well, I mean, Cosmwasm Go is just not going to have the mind share. I don't think.
It's going to be kind of bloated compared to Rust or C++, right? So
it's also just like, are they going to re-implement all the contracts that they've already implemented and had audited? Like,
no.
Without being able to like use those like a library, it kind of seems like it just won't get.
And you know, who knows, man? Noland looks really neat too. I mean, I looked at some of those contracts and it's like super simple. So, but I don't know yet.
Yeah, what I would love is Rust SDK plus Cosmwasm, but
see, for some of us, Rust is
yet.
Too intimidating, man. And I started getting into it and I was loving it, and then I ran into the borrow checker and we went a few rounds and I lost. So
what editor are you using?
I was using Sea Lion. So
because I've got Rust Analyzer, LSP server, and Emacs, and it just like when I screw up the borrow checking, it goes no. It goes, you've done a bad thing, and you just go sit in the corner while I throw compiler errors at you until you're very, 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 very in pain. So I keep
telling myself I'll learn it once I have time.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things is just, again, coming from like a high level language, like the package management is just like, it's like all the good things about npm, most of the bad things removed. and it's just very, very straightforward for like a systems programming language, like package management experience. Like it's really good. And then the dev tooling's pretty decent, but the best thing is the fact that you can have macros for like serialization, deserialization, and that sort of stuff, where you literally go like, here's my enum, give me it in JSON.
In my opinion, macros are one of the worst things that it brought over from C++, right? So that world, because they're opaque.
Yeah, well, I mean, the rule of what the rule of Lisp macros is you don't need a macro, right? That's the motto. But like, there's a point where, where the hammer and the nail are no longer working, and you need to just like improvise some kind of railgun type situation to drive the nail. And at that point, you do need a macro. And there's definitely some things in like Rust where you go like, all right, I can see that this must have been implemented via a macro. Do I have a desire to write my own? No. But it's definitely resolving a problem that I had, I guess. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. I guess the thing that resonated for me with that comment that came in, I guess, was like, whether or not there's an argument at this stage, and I guess this is the core value out of a chain like Juno or Secret, is that you should be able to, maybe less so Secret, I guess, because in order to maintain the privacy guarantees, you have to stay on Secret. But the idea that you can bootstrap a product and then move it off when you're ready, the thing that kind of resonated with me about this comment was that the idea that there are so few devs in the space that splitting up mindshare onto loads of app chains is like potentially cross purposes. But then it's kind of back to what you were saying about Unix and the original Tender duty, right? Do one thing, do it well, and that's the other reasoning behind an app chain, right?
Yeah, and the one thing that kind of struck me when I heard him say it was, I think the whole point of Cosmos is this democratization of blockchains, and IBC has really helped realize this new internet model, and I think it's great. Is it resulting in a bunch of shit chains? Yeah, I don't know.
So Pupmos is saying Lido would dramatically restructure the validator set and be detrimental to delegator suffrage. I have to say I don't know enough about how Lido works in order to sort of talk about that any further, to be honest. But so my understanding is, though, Lido are bringing the chain online, they're going to use ICS, right? So this is presumably intended to be the first out in the wild use of interchain security.
I have no idea there, but the idea of flattening the voting power resulting in a reduction in delegator suffrage, I think, is really interesting. I mean, the irony here, of course, is that we've had a conversation here in this chat probably every single time we've met to talk about how we could, resolve the fact that the top 5 of a chain of most Cosmos chains can help the network.
Yeah, flattening the validator set doesn't seem like necessarily a problem to me. I think that kind of sounds like a good.
Yeah. Huh.
But
I actually want to address the comment earlier before as well about the brain drain. So I think it's a really apt point, but I think that it's a little bit the conversation is unfortunately nuanced. There's actually a Cosmos SDK that I've spec'd out that effectively I want to develop as an SDK because it could benefit all chains. The problem is there's no funding for it, right? So I've gone to several different building funders, I guess, grantees, and everyone's like, this is an amazing idea. I think you should put it. We cannot fund you for it. If you want to create your own chain that only does this, great. If you want to build it on Atom or on Juno or on Osmosis, we can't fund that. We can't fund it at all. So really the only recourse for getting funding is building your own chain. And it does have that side effect of there is that brain drain. But I think that a more interesting side effect is that, or not side effect, but observation is that if you look at most Cosmos chains GitHubs, they have like the last 6 months they've done no development, right? So it's kind of hard to claim there's a brain drain whenever they aren't actually doing any development.
So I'm curious now, what was your idea about the SDK?
Basically, I mean, it's fairly simple. The idea is essentially, if you've used Venmo or Zelle or Cash App or whatever, a request feature. So like create another module where you can essentially wrap any other transaction in a request. So let's say you're shutting down your validator and you put out a 30-day notice saying, hey, I'm shutting down my validator. You could then send out a request to all your delegators with an undelegate or a redelegate transaction, which they would then accept and then be able to go through and redelegate their funds without having to go through any sort of rigmarole around staking. Or even if, let's just say you and I went out to coffee or whatever, and I paid for lunch, I could send you, a 1 Juno request to pay me back. Just something simple like that, but wrapping all transactions.
So kind of like Auth-C does for like allowances, kind of just a way of like flipping the I want to make this type of message of Cosmos message type, instead saying I would like you to acknowledge this by sending me back the Cosmos message type I've requested.
Yeah, exactly right. And so the idea would even be that you could, add a chain of them. So if you want to send to multiple people, you just send in a JSON blob and it would give it out to everyone that it needs to go out to, and then they could just respond and execute it.
Yeah, it's kind of cool. But as I guess you've touched on, the incentives are quite skewed at the moment, aren't they? Which this actually, the interesting thing is that as well, the launching a smart contract on a smart contract chain in Cosmos is also economically not as beneficial. I mean, especially if you want to get investor funding, like for HAL Social and stuff, like we are bootstrapping it ourselves. But I know that it also makes sense to launch on a chain where there is a large user base already, rather than trying to bootstrap your own. But if you were going after investment money, it would be a lot easier to do it as a single shot chain with only one permissioned smart contract running on it. And I think there have been a few projects that have moved over to Cosmos from Terra that are basically going that route, where they're going to just like bootstrap as their own chain, like just one shot. And they're going to bootstrap with probably almost no users and maybe die in that wilderness because their investors are like, got to be a blockchain. So that it cuts both ways, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, my vision for why Juno is great is effectively my imagining of what a chain should do, or what an app should do, is it should use Juno or Secret or any generalized smart contract platform, create their platform, create their community, create their base, and if they find that they need to expand out, then they can go do that. And my vision of what Juno should be is effectively that sandbox, for lack of a better term, to create that community, especially when it already has such a strong community. And so if there ends up being that desire where you find some reason to bounce out, that's when you do it. I think it's kind of the question is like of short-term to long-term goals to me. I don't think that necessarily all new chains are short-term oriented. I certainly don't want to make that claim. But I think that if you're going for like a really long-term project, build somewhere that already exists and expand if you need to, versus if you need cash now, you would just create your own chain and then dump on retail effectively.
Yeah. So moving on to the interchain security bit, because it seems related to this 72 thing. So the background to interchain security and why we're bringing it up on the show is because I sort of said I went on Twitter and just went, okay, don't really understand why we need interchain security, because it's not really hard to get a validator set. And if your chain doesn't work out, that's too bad. But like finding validators, admittedly potentially of varying qualities, is not actually a problem that has existed for some time. And so I was like, no, what is the actual use case? What is the problem that ICS is solving? And I guess the thing that I wasn't really considering as part of this is, from somebody who's more used to working in a smart contract environment, I'm used to having what Schultzy just described, which is an on-ramp for an idea into a community. But if you're building stuff at chain level, at SDK level, then maybe ICS is a better fit for that. But anyway, Twitter was very quick to tell me I was wrong in about 15 different ways. And so I'm going to read out some of the responses that were very good on why we need interchain security. So I'm going to just do some call outs here. Phonic G made some really, really good points. I can't put them all in full because it would take me ages to read out a thread, but around sort of market cap and stuff like that. Skull XBT also said having a small market cap is dangerous when starting out. And then Simon Water, friend of the show from Confio, from Cosmwasm, said that essentially backed up that this was on a longer thread, saying a small market cap means you can buy out the chain. It's an important attack vector to consider in a bear market or for new projects. And I think, again, like especially tail end of last year, a lot of the chains that were launching, Huahua, right? Huge market cap. So you look at that and you go, where does interchain security fit into this when a literal meme chain can have a multi-$100 million market cap? It becomes more obvious in a bear market. So thank you, Simon, for pointing that out. Eric Opp said there's pros and cons to ICS and chains should decide, and added a hot take on the end, right? And this one I like. Interchain security is Atom's last chance to stay relevant after Gravity Dex and Gravity Bridge failure. If ICS isn't a hit, then it's over. Spicy hot take. So
we continue on there, the fray. I've got a comment just about the market caps and buying out a chain. I think that like it's probably would come cost prohibitive even for a shit chain, because once you start to buy all the tokens, specifically with how a DEX functions, you are going to get cost prohibitive pretty quick. You can't just keep buying the tokens without the market cap rising significantly. So,
but that's why they halted Terra. I mean, it was happening.
Terra worked differently though. It was like a mechanism where you cash in the UST and it mints.
That's right now. Terra Classic, you can't register a new validator. You can't delegate new tokens to a validator. You can redelegate, but otherwise that was all a hard fork that went into the code, because once it devalued, it was possible to take over.
Yeah, but it devalued to basically nothing. and the distribution of tokens is all over the place because of the way that the that minting module was working when you were cashing in UST. But I think for regular chains, like most of them aren't even on a SEX. So, but even on a CEX, like once you start to try and buy up a meaningful amount of tokens, it's just going to push the price sky high unless you do it over a really, really, really long time, which I think then people would start to notice before you got anywhere near a big enough amount to actually do some damage to a chain.
I wonder if it's okay, like let's imagine I have loads of money and I'm a bad guy. I'm a real bad dude. I would imagine the way to go about it would be to try and over-the-counter purchase from founders of a chain, but go to them each individually and just gamble that they didn't tell each other that they were doing it out of either embarrassment or sneakiness, and then just see if you can get 33%. Because a lot of chains do have that much vested in the founding team, you know?
So that might be possible, but imagine this, right? What's the point?
I'm imagining. I've got my imagination hat on.
So if you go to all this effort, right, to get all this token and spend all this money to get all this token, why? Are you going to maliciously attack a chain that you own all the token for? Even if you drain the community pool, you can't possibly fucking sell it without killing the price of it anyway. It just doesn't make any sense.
But I think that's the point, though, right? So, like, DYDX is coming to Cosmos, right? They're probably going to be, as soon as they spin up, $100 million project. But there's already other DeFi projects. Let's say they're worth 1 million. They might just buy all the tokens just to literally kill the project. I think that's the bigger concern, rather than some guy deciding that he likes the project enough to kill it. It's a competing entity that says, this is a really great product and they could take our share. We can't have that.
I submit to you that if a project's worth $1 million, it's worth killing.
I mean, in crypto, yeah. In like normal startup land, I would feel pretty proud to start $1 million company. I'd be like, this is kind of nice.
You're already running $1 million company, mate.
Maybe before the crash. So I just want to pull out a few comments we've had in the chat. So Putmar says, interchain security comes with the sacrifice of self-sovereignty, which try and say very quickly. That's quite tricky. There's a lot of S's in that one. Gravity Bridge is a prime candidate for interchain security because its token does not provide sufficient economic security to the collateral it holds. Juno.love says Fortis was worth 35
billion.
My brain just halted. Is that a billion?
Yeah, I think so.
On paper. By the way, do you like my imagination hat? This is my imagination hat. And
you look very special.
Yeah, it's very sensational. And then a variety of people in the chat have basically been advocating different degen strategies for attacking a chain. So we've obviously started something with that line of questioning. So a final couple of points I had from other people, but read out in my voice so that the clever points will attach themselves in your mind to me. But Trill and Juno News said that ICS shouldn't be viewed as an end in itself. You should have the set as interim when you move to an app chain, and then you can get different and new validators. So I think what they're referring to there is that there's a second version of ICS coming later that allows you to layer some validators from one set and have new validators, right? So that's an interesting development as and when it comes. And then the final point here, this is a good one, is from H. De Valence, who's one of the founders of Penumbra, and one of those people who's very, very clever. And whenever you use crypto libraries in Rust, you see their GitHub handle come up all the time to remind you that you are just a small brain Grug developer. But they said app-specific chains can have their own security and be fully sovereign and pay the cost of that, or they can be secured by the hub or an ICS chain, or, and this is the really powerful part, they can choose somewhere right in the middle, and they can change their choice at any time. And that is a reference again to layering. So yeah, those are all of the tepid to hot takes that I thought were worth mentioning on the ICS thing. I'm kind of going to go and say that I think I stand corrected on ICS. I think there is a use case for it. I think I just didn't see it initially because I was blinkered by Cosmwasm and by only building on top of smart contract chains.
Well, yeah, it's like horizontal scaling, right? You can only scale so big on Cosmwasm before it's bloated and can't do shit.
Well, I mean, the other side of the conversation is calling interchain security worthless calling Polkadot worthless?
Yes. That was the deep desire of the Fray when he said that comment originally, is that he was throwing shade at Polkadot indirectly.